It's time for Cutting Edge Consciousness with Freeman Michaels and Barnet Bain. Thought-provoking discussions and bold ideas from the edge of possibility.
Welcome to Cutting Edge Consciousness. This is Freeman Michaels.
And Barnet Bain. Good to be here with you today, Freeman.
Yeah, it's a kind of a gloomy day today, but we're making the most of it.
A good East Coast kind of a day.
Yeah, well, I'm from San Francisco, so this is perfectly normal.
A good kind of North Coast kind of day.
Yeah, any kind of coastal coast.
It's a good coastal day. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
When it's all soupy and white like this, it feels like when I was a young kid, and there would be these whiteout days, these snowy, cloudy whiteout days.
In northern Quebec.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
look out over the ocean here at the back of my house, and it's just socked in. It looks like snow blind, like at the same
Nice. So do you get that little excitement, like I'm going to get to stay home from school and play hooky today?
I'm home from school every day now.
That's
one of the perks of some seasoning in life.
That's
you get
right.
to stay home. Well, we're pleased to have a special guest with us today. First and foremost, he's a friend of mine, and so I'm very pleased to have him with us. It's Phillip Goldberg. Phil is going to join us and to talk about his new book, American Veda.
Great book.
Subtitled From Emerson and the Beatles to Yoga and Meditation, How Indian Spirituality Changed the West. And changed the West, it certainly did. Phil is the author, in addition to this, or co-author of 19 books, I think it is.
Whoa.
And he's a man of many gifts and talents, an ordained interfaith minister, so if you're planning to get remarried anytime, you know who to call. A speaker, wonderful speaker and workshop and seminar leader. Also the founder of the Spiritual Wellness and Healing Associates.
Now, he probably didn't expect you to plug his ability to marry people.
You know what?
That's a new, it's a new business outlet.
I look after my homies. So, Phil, we're pleased to have you with us.
I'm pleased to be with you, Barnet.
And this is
both of you.
That's okay. I'm Freeman here, by the way. But the thing that I think is so wonderful, because just recently, in fact, 2 weeks ago, we had Randy Davila on, who wrote The Gnostic Mystery, and we were talking about the spiritual tradition of the Christian mystics, early Christian mystics, the Gnostics, and a thread of that, in my mind, carries through in reading your book. So as I was reading parts of your book, I was thinking, wow, this is so similar, and it's all sort of coming out in a new spiritual, can I call it a movement? I don't know. It's a trend towards people who say they are spiritual but not religious. And a good portion of what is influencing these folks, and I'm going to raise my hand and call myself one of them, it comes from the Vedic tradition.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a big point of my book, actually, that the teachings that came here from India didn't just affect the obvious people, the people who had gurus and went to ashrams and practiced yoga, but has had a major impact on the culture as a whole, entering into the sort of fabric of American life through a variety of means, including healthcare and psychology and other secular sources, but also it has catalyzed directly, and you can see the evidence in empirical surveys and so forth, the religious landscape in general. So you have this explosion of what you correctly described as spiritual but not religious category, which is the fastest growing category in American religious life. And I think it would be inconceivable if there hadn't been that sudden eruption of interest and accessibility to the teachings that came here from the East, including Buddhism, because it gave people a framework to be spiritual without having to be conventionally religious, and it gave them practices to actually engage their spiritual impulse. And it also, as you said, with regard to Christian mysticism, it also led to the sort of resurgence of buried mystical pathways in both Christianity and Judaism. So you now have various forms of Christian and Jewish meditation and chanting and so forth, all of which were sort of directly derived from people's interest in the teachings of India.
There was this wonderful connection that you make very clear in the book, that relationship between the wisdom of the East as it was disseminated into our culture primarily through the literary giants like Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman and lately all the way up to Aldous Huxley, and of course people are very familiar with Joseph Campbell and his influence on literature and blockbuster cinema, Star Wars for one. This whole
right.
All of these are Vedantic philosophies that have been disseminated into the popular culture through our artists.
That's quite right, and that's one of the great discoveries I made. Well, I don't mean that in the scientific sense, but I mean in the context of my research, was to see all these interesting and subtle sort of streams and tributaries whereby somebody becomes interested in these teachings. They have a transformative effect on their lives or their worldview, and they in turn become transmitters of these teachings. And in some cases, like the ones you mentioned, they are capable of influencing thousands or millions of people through their own work. And that's how these teachings entered in, through public intellectuals, through artists. And don't forget the music. You know, the influence of just George Harrison alone, not to mention, you know, all the others.
Norwegian Wood.
Yeah.
That was the first time most people heard a sitar.
It's beautiful.
I can remember the moment. I can remember.
You remember the moment?
I remember.
That was the era when you don't remember much of it.
I actually happen to remember quite a bit of that experience.
That's great.
Slow dancing with Jenny Hooper,
Jenny
and
Hooper.
thinking, what the heck is that
I know
instrument?
Jennifer Hooper. No.
All right. Everyone knows Jennifer Hooper. No, I'm just kidding. That's not right.
Jenny
Jenny's
Hooper,
wonderful.
listening to Norwegian Wood and
That's
thinking
fantastic.
this is really otherworldly stuff. I'd never heard anything like it.
I want to jump in with something you said, because I think we can take the conversation. Though I want to say that the history of this is fantastic, and I don't want to abandon that. But something you said, which is something that we talk about here, just the languaging, that it's transformative, that the consciousness, and that's what we're really talking about here, at least from my perspective, that this is not just a theory, that this is actually rooted very deeply in a many thousand-year-old tradition. And in fact, Buddhism at least had threads back, so did Christianity, threads back to the roots of this mystical tradition, the Vedic tradition. But what I thought was fascinating is that you use the words transmitting it through various teachers. And it speaks to a quality that lies underneath the history, that has to do with what has been, what is being tapped into here, that has an energetic quality that cuts deeper for many people. At least it does for me. I know from my yoga experience and my years of meditating that there's a deeper resonance in this tradition that people are getting access to. And that's really what I'd love for you to speak to.
Well, I think you cut right to the core of the issue here. These are not just ideas. These are not philosophical speculations. They're often viewed that way by people who don't know better as either theology or philosophy. But the whole core of the Vedic tradition, just as in Buddhism and yoga, from which all stem from that tradition or evolved out of it, is the inner experience of higher consciousness, that all the ideas and all the textbooks and all the philosophical treatises, they all point to that, and they all will tell you that they're useless in the absence of that inner experience. So what actually came here and took root in America was the philosophical system of Vedanta, which is one aspect of the Vedic tradition that made the most sense to Americans and had the most sort of appeal to our rational frame of reference. But the other piece of it was the repertoire of practices, of meditative and psychophysiological practices that we think of as yoga, as the full package of yoga, that are the sort of experiential component of what came here, without which it would not have had, it would have just been another philosophical ideas, and only people who are sort of interested in ideas and intellectual speculation would have been interested. These practices transform people's lives, and that's the sort of test tube. That's one of the reasons these teachings took hold here, from going way back, to their first exposure here, was that Americans are very pragmatic people. So these ideas first made sense, but no one asked you to just take them on faith. They said, these things will work if you do these practices. So you do this and you do that, and you can expect to experience this. And people did, and so therefore they continued to do them, and they told their friends, and they became advocates of it, and people's lives changed. And come the 60s, that exploded big time when all the gurus finally were able to come to America and teach these practices directly.
Do you think there is any truth to my observation, my casual observation, that it's this confluence of these great philosophical educators finding a platform in the West, primarily in California, if I'm not incorrect on that, at exactly the same time as there was not only the appetite for idea-driven entertainment, but also the vehicle for delivering it, media.
Yes.
That these were, this is a media phenomenon.
To a large extent. I mean, look, this, as you know, I start my book in America 200 or more years ago, when the media consisted of some books that were coming through Europe into New England, and people like Emerson and Thoreau started reading them. And then other great teachers came here, early teachers like Swami Vivekananda and Yogananda and many others, but the access to the media was limited. Yogananda used mail order. Mm-hmm. That was a very big deal in the 20s and the 30s. He could actually mail yoga lessons, to people. He was on the radio. But come the 60s, post-war years, when the mass media erupted and transportation got to the point where people could go to and from India with relative ease and get on a plane or hitchhike from, their little town in the Midwest to the San Francisco or the East Village or something and get exposed to these things. That was enormous. I mean, when the Beatles started to transcendental meditation and they met Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, I opened the book with that because it was so big. But when you think about it, this was pre-internet, of course, but it was in every newspaper and magazine, and these were syndicated all over the world. And it was on Johnny Carson, and it was on the Today Show, and it was on the news, and it was, everywhere. People, in Nebraska knew what was going on in London.
In fact, that iconic image of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, I think it was his birthday party at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, in his pajamas. You know the image I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It seems to me that I've seen that image almost as a tableau of with various Eastern mystics in various states of undress, surrounded by
that's what gave rise to the uniform. We didn't know. It was John Lennon's pajamas. Now every spiritual teacher wears pajamas, right?
I'm not saying that this is not at all tongue-in-cheek. I'm beginning to, as I look through some of the fantastic images in the book. The John Lennon one is not in the book, but they harken back to that. There's a sort of iconography there. And it speaks to the kind of give and there's this sort of ebb and flow. There's this give and take where these teachers and our musician advocates became, they cross-fertilized. And you do speak someplace in the book about this phenomena that you point out how I think it was Thoreau that had influence on Gandhi, and Gandhi in turn influenced Martin Luther King.
Right. It was a little volley between, Thoreau being influenced by the Bhagavad Gita and other books from India, then influencing Gandhi, and Gandhi coming back and influencing Martin Luther King. So the India-America interchange has been going on a long time, and come the 60s, two things happened. One, it was transportation and communication, but the other was a change in immigration laws in America in 1965 that enabled a lot of these gurus to come here and stay. That had not been the case prior to that. And so the other images you're thinking of is like Swami Satchidananda opening the Woodstock Festival.
Yes.
And the Beatles in India, with Maharishi, and the images of Ram Dass and all those kind of things. You're right, they were pictorial images. And don't forget things like in 1967, the movie Monterey Pop, which was ended with 15 minutes of Ravi Shankar blowing everybody's mind.
What about Ram Dass on Chris Buckley's show?
Yeah, well, and you had things like in 1968, Allen Ginsberg chanting on William Buckley.
Oh no, that's what I'm referring. That's what I'm referring to. Yes, it was. Yes,
I was
exactly.
I was 1 year old, so the two of you now have completely left me in this.
Complete with harmonium and everything. I think we need to
take a quick break.
If you go to YouTube and Google this, it's great. In my workshops, I'll show this clip. Allen Ginsberg is being interviewed by the conservative William Buckley, and he suddenly takes out his harmonium and starts doing the Hare Krishna chant.
I love it.
Talk about transmission.
Yeah. Don't go away. We're going to take a break. We're going to come right back and pick up on more. When we come back, I want to ask you to get into what's going on now vis-a-vis our homegrown teachers.
So stay with us.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.